The night air from the Blackwater carried salt and tar and the faint rot of river weed. Ned Stark stood at the window in the Tower of the Hand and let the cool wash over his face until his knuckles dimmed from white against the sill. The city sprawled below like some great, sleeping beast. Lanterns burned here and there, drifting sparks on the dark. Far on the quay, a ship chimed its bell, 3 mournful notes that reached up the stone and drifted into the room like a warning or a benediction. When the door opened, he didn't turn. He had known the footfall before the guard's voice announced, "Lord Renly." Renly Baratheon came in with a gust of perfumes, citrus and something from the gardens, cut green stems, summer trapped in glass. His green cloak trailed like a field of grass after a storm. "My Lord Hand," he said, striving for levity and missing it by a hair. "You sent." Ned looked. In moonlight, Renly's beauty sharpened his impatience rather than softened it. He was young, dangerously young, and he wanted the world to bend because he smiled at it. Loras Tyrell followed, silent behind him in armor the color of polished olives, a half-dozen hard-eyed reachmen at his back. The air around them quivered with intent. "You have a plan," Ned said. "I had one last night and the night before," Renly said lightly. "But the hour was late and we were sober." His eyes flashed. "It has to be dawn."
"Dawn?" Ned echoed.
"Before the queen pulls tight her web. The boy rises early for his morning ride. His dog never leaves him. I can gather 100 swords who do not love Lannister gold. Take the boy in the yard, the mother in her bed. Then you put Lord Robert's words before the council and before the White Cloaks, and the realm will stand on law instead of lies." Loras said nothing. He watched Ned with courteous intensity, like a cat measuring a leap. Ned's hand brushed the vellum on his desk. The king's will folded twice and sealed with wax hardened into an unreadable scar. He had sat with that scrap more nights than he slept, tracing Robert's hand in his mind, hearing the rough laughter as if it had not been weeks since Robert bled on a boar spear. Like the smell of the river, the memory would not leave him. "There will be blood," he said, "and what you do at dawn you must carry at dusk and at supper and long after. No one puts it back by supper time." Renly's mouth tightened, but he did not break. "I want a realm that lives long enough to see supper time, my lord." Ned turned from the window, and the choice settled in him with the weight of stone. The honor that had been an anchor all his life shifted, and he felt, for a heartbeat, the cold void beneath where it had held. It would never sit right, this thing they were going to do, but honor had been a poor sword in a den of knives. "Very well," he said quietly. "Dawn." They moved like water, finding every lowest place, all night, silent as frost. Varys' little birds had already flown, and the spymaster himself arrived as a shadow in powder and silk, his hands like pale spiders. He said he liked nothing about this, which meant he liked some of it very much, and at his murmured suggestion a small brown door in a lesser corridor was wedged so it would not stick at the wrong moment. Grand Maester Pycelle sent a pigeon to someone very late. Varys noticed, of course, and then shuffled to his pallet and snored as if the old gods themselves had drugged him. Ned sent for Ser Barristan Selmy while the moon clung to the tower tops. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard came without his cloak, armor bare and burnished, white hair disordered by sleep, face grave. Renly's men shifted when they saw him, as men would shift when a legend enters the room. Ned placed the sealed will before him and did not speak until Barristan had read every word. "My oath is to protect the king," Barristan said at last, voice steady as rain on slate, "and to uphold the law that makes a king. You will not harm the boy. He is Robert's get as much as I am a Dornishman," Renly said sharply. Ned's look cut him short. "No harm will come to the children while I am Hand," he said. "We will hold them safe until the realm knows its rightful king." Barristan inclined his head a fraction and slid the parchment between his breastplate and his shirt, close to the old soldier's heart. "Then I will stand with the law." They went with the night bleeding out of the sky. The air turned thin and silver, and the torches guttered in their brackets along the covered walk leading to Maegor's Holdfast. The drawbridge, a black tongue over the green moat, lay flat, A sleepy Lannister guardsman rubbed his eyes and never finished the gesture. Loras' mailed forearm caught him around the throat and eased him down without a sound. The second was less graceful. Steel whispered and then cried once, quickly. Ned's stomach twisted. He had seen men die enough for 2 lifetimes, but not like this, not in the quiet before birdsong. He pushed down the revulsion. The door admitted them to the keep where kings had hidden in terror, and where women had poisoned others in fear, and where secrets had always lived. In the yard below, the first stable hands were about. A lantern swung. A boy's shout echoed, a laugh cut by shushing. Sandor Clegane, the hound, stood a pace behind the prince as he tugged on his glove, and the hound's burned face in the lantern light looked like the malevolence of fire given shape. Joffrey turned, saw swords, and his mouth opened. The hound stepped forward with a sound like a dog warning a bear. "By order of the Hand and the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard," Barristan said, his voice rising above the morning like a bell. "The prince will come with us. His grace will ride when it pleases him," the hound said lazily and reached for his sword. Loras Tyrell moved like a thought. The hound's blade flashed out from scabbard to meet him. Steel rang, and sparks pricked the dawn. Ned had in men duel as sport, he had even judged it, but nothing in sport prepared him for these two. Loras was all grace and speed, a sweep of green and gold across the gray yard. The hound was ugly efficiency, a butcher's strength setting aside the pretty cuts and going for tendon and bone. Each blow came with intent to end a life. "Enough," Ned said, and knew at once that his voice could not reach men standing on the knife edge. He turned. "Tomard," he said, "take the prince." The Stark guardsman hefted his shield and went forward with 2 men, Barristan with him, white blade at the ready. The hound saw them and pivoted like a great cat, but Loras pressed and pressed, and even the strongest man cannot look 2 ways with 1 pair of eyes. Tomard slid in, slammed his shield to drive Joffrey back into a livery door, and Harold, a quiet riverman in Stark colors, seized the prince by his elbow and wrist with both hands as if he were some fish to be landed. Joffrey shrieked, "Unhand me! Dog! Dog!" The hound knocked Loras aside with a brutal shove of his shoulder and came on. Barristan stepped, old and perfect, and a feather's width decided the world. The flat of his blade smacked the hound's sword aside, and the tip kissed the hound's throat where the burned flesh met his unruined jaw. "No more," Barristan said. Sweat trickled along the lines of his face and glittered like frost. "Do not test me, Sandor." Something like respect flickered and died in the hound's eyes. He took 1 step back, hands open. "He's your boy then," he said, voice rough. "You keep him from his games." Joffrey twisted in Harold's grip and spat at Barristan, spittle catching the old knight's gorget. Barristan did not flinch. Inside Maegor's holdfast, Cersei Lannister woke to more steel. She came to the threshold of her bedchamber with her hair unbound and a gown hastily belted, her beauty too sharp for mourning. Myrcella, all eyes and golden braids, peered around her skirts. Tommen sobbed behind, too young for anything but fear. 2 Kingsguard, Meryn Trant and Boros Blunt, puffed at her shoulders, white cloaks thrown over their nightshirts, blades bared. Renly was first through the door. "Good morrow, sweet sister," he said with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Traitor," she breathed without looking at him. Her gaze sought Ned's like a knife looking for a rib. "You dare." "By Robert's hand and seal," Ned said. His voice surprised him, steady as if he were arranging the harvest at Winterfell. "Until the rightful heir is named and crowned, I am protector of the realm. You will lay down your swords and come quietly." "You have no rightful anything," Cersei said. "You have paper." Barristan, still smelling of sweat and iron, drew forth the will and held it out. She looked at it as one might look at a dead thing brought to table. She did not reach to take it. "Burn it," she said to Meryn Trant. Barristan did not move. His silence turned like a key in the Kingsguard's mind, and Meryn Trant's sword point drooped. Boros Blunt licked his lips and glanced between Renly's knights, hard men with their weight forward, and the Lord Commander's grave face. They lowered their steel. Cersei's mouth tightened, and a fine crack appeared in the glaze of her composure. "Your children will be safe," Ned said before she could speak again. "On my honor." "Your honor," she said softly, and tilted her head like a woman considering a bit of cloth. "How much is that worth here, Lord Stark?" Her eyes were pools that showed no bottom. "You think you are the first man to bring his northern honor to this keep as a lantern. This place eats lanterns." "Safe," Ned repeated. She smiled then, a slow, poisonous curving of lips, and held out her hands for the cuffs as if accepting ornaments. "Do not put me in some stinking hole," she said. "I am a lioness, not a rat." "You are the king's widow," Ned said. "You will be housed accordingly." They took her to rooms in the maiden vault where the windows were narrow and the guards posted thick as flies. Tommen paddled along like a crying duckling. Myrcella made no sound at all, only looked, eyes older than they had any right to be. They separated the children gently as one might separate a clutch of kittens. Cersei did not weep as she watched them go. She did not look away from Ned's face. It happened fast, and in that speed lay their safety. The drawbridge was raised. The white cloaks returned to the white sword tower under Barristan's hand. Renly put his men at the gates of the Red Keep, and among them Ned slid men of his own, quiet northern men with hands like knotted roots who took orders and said little. In the armory, racks of spears and crossbows changed hands with the creak of wood and the clink of heads. Janos Slint, barreling into the yard in a sweat, started to bluster and found the ends of a dozen longbows looking at him like a row of little black mouths. He went away white and left without his chain of office. Before noon, Ser Jacelyn Bywater wore it, and the city watch looked different without quite knowing why. The ravenry clattered and flapped until the sky itself seemed to be full of black wings. Ravens sailed for Dragonstone, for the Vale, for Winterfell, for Riverrun, for even the Arbor, though that ship would be a long time in port. Ned sent words like stones thrown into water and watched the ripples spread. By midday, half the city knew something had happened. By dusk, everyone did. And when the bells of the great September of Baelor struck the hour for evening prayer, Ned Stark went down the hill with Barristan and Renly and stood before the high septon in his powdered perfumes and presented the king's last will to the father's marble gaze. The small council chamber smelled of wax and vellum and the leavings of too many meals brought in on silver and taken out on tin. Pycelle blinked himself awake and shook crumbs from his beard and declaimed for a time about precedent in a voice that carried for miles without moving far. Varys listened with hands like a prayer and a smile like patience painted. Peter Baelish lounged as if at a house of pleasure, but his eyes were bright bird quick. "And what?" Peter drawled after Barristan had finished, laying out the matter with the plainness of stone. "If the boy were not to be some bastard at all, but exactly what our Lady Queen says he is? The princely hair so fair?" Renly said, bored already with the dance. "Is there a mirror in this room, Peter? You could hold it beside the boy and ask the gods why the sons of Robert look nothing like Robert." "The gods love a jest," Peter replied lightly, "and take their laughter in blood." He let his gaze rest on Ned for one moment too long and smiled. "I only remind the table. For bastardy, there must be proof, and for proof, more than a book about hair. The king's will names no heir," Barristan said. "It names a protector until the young king." He looked straight at Ned when he used the word, not at Renly, which told Ned something he would think about later. "Is of age, or until the rightful heir takes his place. The boy is safe. He will not come to harm in our keeping. Lord Eddard will send for Lord Stannis." "Lord Stannis?" Peter repeated, as if tasting vinegar. "How fortunate that you are the sort of man who thinks the law is a ladder that reaches the clouds." "What would you have me be?" Ned asked, and the quiet in the question was sharper than any of the swords in the room. "A realist," Peter said, and laced long fingers together. "But realism has not proved fashionable here." "We will be men of law," Ned said, and he stood, and the matter was done. Bywater's men dragged the river for rumors and brought up daggers for proof. Bywater himself came to Ned before moonrise with two of the city watch who had pockets heavy with Lannister coin, which they spilled onto the floor with faces that went slack with fear as soon as they saw Barristan's mouth whiten. Littlefinger vanished before midnight. Varys said, with a polite little sigh, that he had always been slippery and that such men found the cracks between stones as snakes found warmth. Sansa came to Ned with her hands clasped, eyes bright as new-cut sapphires. He had not seen her look thus since the day the wheelhouse first loomed in Winterfell's yard, a girl on the brink of the first feast of summer. He would rather have walked barefoot over nails than be the man to take that brightness away. "Father," she said, "please." Joffrey only said, "He would never mean. He can't be shut away like a common thief. He is a prince." "He is safe," Ned said. The words felt like stale crumbs on his tongue. "He'll be treated as the son of a queen. He is complicated, Sansa." He thought of a different boy, black hair falling in his eyes as he drew a string of fresh-fletched arrows from the table and smiled with shy pride, and he felt an ache as sharp as hunger. "This city is not safe," he said, and that at least rang true. "Nothing here is what it seems." She did not cry. She was Ned's daughter, and she listened to the quiet in him that had never lied to her, and something in her gaze faltered. "He will still want to marry me," she said finally. So small a hope he could see her trying to tuck it into her fist and hide it from the wind. Ned's heart flinched. "We will speak of marriage when the realm is settled," he said, and that, too, was no lie. Arya watched everything from shadows and hated the city's smell. She stalked its corridors like a lean gray cat and learned that even in a world of armored men, a quick child could be invisible if she wanted. Once she followed Varys for 3 turnings of the keep and discovered a door so narrow she had to turn sideways to slip through. She heard things and did not understand half of them, but she understood that her father moved through a storm and that he did not bend. Stannis Baratheon came to the city with a forest of masts behind him and his jaw set to crack stone. The wind was with him, a surly gray wind out of the east, and the Dragonstone fleet threaded the river as if it had come here every day for 1,000 years. A red woman stood at his shoulder when he stepped ashore, and her hair bled against the dun of the sky. She looked at the towers as if measuring where to place a torch. "Lord Stannis," Ned said, meeting him at the mud gate with Barristan and a line of white cloaks behind. The river stink was strong here. Stannis' face did not admit to smelling anything. "Lord Eddard," Stannis said, "you sent for your lawful king. Here I am." "The proof," Renly said, because of course Renly had come. He roared at Stannis like a peacock at a hedge. "You have it in a pouch about your neck, no doubt. Names and hair and who went where to some whore's bed." "Truth is no whore," Stannis said flatly, "and needs no brooch." His eyes flicked to Ned. "Jon Arryn died for what he learned. He died because he learned it. That is what you must understand." Ned inclined his head. "I have understood that for some time." They climbed the hill together. The red woman's eyes were a strange color, too intense to be human. She paced at Stannis' side as if tethered to him by a line only she could see. Davos Seaworth walked a step behind. A plain man with a smuggler's scars and a steady gaze that took in everything and judged none of it quickly. He and Ned's eyes met once, and a silent recognition passed. Men who had done hard things for honorable reasons and some less honorable ones. Word was sent to the White Sword Tower. The Kingsguard stood in their whites, stark as chalk under a sudden blade of sun, and Barristan stepped forward with the folded wool like the heart of a bird in his palm. The High Septon was fetched from his meat and his perfumes, trembling with the weight of his chain. In the throne room, the Iron Throne crouched on its steps like a beast with too many teeth. Ned had never cared for it. He doubted any man liked the feel of its blades at his back. Cersei was brought in under guard. She wore red that glowed in the hall's cold light and laughed when Stannis was named rightful king and protector until coronation. "Protector," she said. "The last protector protected us right into graves." Stannis' mouth did not twitch. He recited out in short, ugly words what he and Jon Arryn had found, what the lineages showed, who the king had sired and by whom. Varys' little birds had drawn Gendry out from Tobo Mott's forge that morning, blinking, bewildered, big as his father had been at that age. The coal smoke still in his hair and the stubborn set of his jaw so precisely Robert's that a murmur went through the hall like a finger across silk. The boy stood and scratched his arm and looked at the floor. He had a bull on a copper helm at his belt. He clutched it as if it were a saint's relic. Renly laughed once. It was a brittle sound and cracked in the middle. He looked at Stannis and saw in him a wall that would not move. He looked at Ned and saw a man who would not turn for comfort. That night he went from the city with Loras and a tale of banners, as quietly as a summer storm slips off the hills and leaves everything wetter but not cleaner. In his wake he left whispers. Mace Tyrell's men drifted south like leaves called by weather. The Redwine fleet reached for oars and found the Blackwater watched by Dragonstone ships. The Reach bent its knee to itself and waited to see whom it would hate more. It was a strange day when a king took the city without fighting, and yet half the city wanted to hold the breath it had been using to cheer. Stannis set his men on the gates and the walls and said little. He sent letters to every lord in the realm, the words as plain as rope. He ordered the realm's coin counted and found gaps in it that smelled of Peter Baelish's foxden. He asked after the godswood and was told there was none worth the name, and he did not look surprised. He sent the Red Woman to the Seps, and she came back with a quiet smile that made Ned cold. Then he went to see the Queen. It was a narrow chamber, high windows and tight light. Cersei sat on a bench and turned a ring around and around her finger, though she wore no rings now. Her hair had been braided with care but spoke of hands that tugged at comfort too hard. "You stand accused of high treason, incest, and adultery," Stannis said. He set ugliness in a row like nails. "You will be tried. I will be tried in silk if I am tried," Cersei said, and her voice had lost none of its strength. "You will hang me in velvet and call that justice." "You will be tried," Stannis repeated, "and judged, and the law will be done. Your sons will be placed where they cannot be used as banners for those who would rend the realm. Your daughter will be kept in honor until she is placed honorably. This is not a market, woman. There will be no bargains." Cersei laughed. It was a sound like a bell rolled downstairs. "No bargains? Without bargains men starve. Without bargains kings are murdered in their beds. You think law will hold your life? You'll find law has holes like a fisher's net and the right fish slip through." Ned stood with his hand on the window's cool stone and said, "The children are not to be punished for their mother's sins." He did not look at her when he spoke it because he could not. "You are sweet," she said, and looked at him as one might look at a trivial kindness. "You always were. That is why my father will replace you and men like you with men who do not bleed sweetness." Tywin Lannister received the Raven at a table stained with the grease of a late meal. The camp around Harrenhal boiled with men and smoke and those hard-eyed women who followed armies like scavenger birds. Tywin did not curse. He never needed loudness to convey that he would have blood. He took out a clean cloth and wiped his fingers as he read, as if the words themselves left a residue. Jaime stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt and watched his father's mouth thin. "So," Tywin said and put the paper down, "the king's widow and our sweet Joff are in a gilded cage. The stag of Dragonstone and the wolf of Winterfell have made their den in the lion's house." Jaime laughed softly. "I always wondered what my chamber would look like with antlers on the walls." "We will cut them down," Tywin said. His eyes flicked to Kevin. "Double the mountains rides. The Riverlands must learn to scream in the right direction. We hold the west. The boy is of no use to us where he sits. We will take him back when the city is torn between a king no one loves and a hand no one fears." Tyrion came in at that, late and dirty from the road, the stink of the mountain clans fresh as if it were a second skin. He listened while he ate, and then wiped bread on the plate and said, "I would not count on the city tearing itself. The Northern Lord has a way of binding men. He is dull as mud, but mud holds stone in place." "Dullness is not a virtue," Tywin said. "It is when you fight wildfire," Tyrion said mildly. "And Stannis is a whetstone. You will break a lot of steel on him and end with a keen edge or no sword at all." "We will teach the realm lessons," Tywin said, "one at a time. No man learns what is taught kindly." The realm learned. The Riverlands burned. Robb Stark called his banners whether or not his father stood in a city of knives. because the trident had been set alight, and because ravens had brought him words of Lannister raiders, and because the dire wolf on Winterfell's banners had teeth for a reason. He went south with the north at his back and a weight in his chest. Catelyn met him at the crossing and felt both proud and afraid when she saw his face and heard men call him king, which made no sense and every kind of sense at once. Stannis dealt with the queen. He gave her a trial so careful it could have been a machine. He brought book and bastard and brother and maester and guard, and let the word incest lie on the table between them like a blade of ice. The High Septon took 2 days to decide which way the gods breathed, and in the end said the gods breathed law. Cersei laughed until she canted sideways on her bench, and then she stood and said, "Do it beautifully at least," and did not look when they set the date. "Mercy," Ned said, in Stannis' chamber where the tapestries had all been turned to face the wall. He did not ask for her sake. He asked because Sansa walked the halls like a sleepwalker and Arya had started carrying her little sword everywhere even when the maids scolded, and because there must be some place where a child who had loved a lie could lay down their grief and not be splashed with the blood used to write the realm's laws. "Mercy breeds rot," Stannis said, and for a moment the old bitterness crept into his voice. "I spent my life watching rot under a smiling crown. I will not watch it again." "She is the mother of your niece and nephews," Ned said. "They are not mine," Stannis said harshly, and then his voice dropped. "They will not die. I am not a monster, Stark. Nothing will be done to the girl. The boys will be placed." He meant shipwrecked without a ship. He meant the wall or some monastery or a life this city would never think about. Ned nodded because it was better than heads in a basket, and felt the cold go deeper into his bones. Before any of that, Renly's green banners gathered like a storm on the Rose Road, and south of the city, tents bloomed in colors that made the land itself look as if it had flowered. Mace Tyrell's laugh rolled through camps like barrels down a slope. Loras' face could not be told from a statue's. He took off his helm in his tent at night and wiped the day's sweat from his face and said nothing because there were no words in any language that would make this hurt less. Catelyn Stark came into that camp because she had gone to seek peace from men who thought peace was something to speak of and then ignore. She went because there were only bad choices, and she had spent her life choosing between rain that flooded and rain that drowned. She found Renly like a starling among peacocks, bright and brighter still, and she told him that the North had no wish to see more kings than the snows in winter if it could be helped. He smiled and offered her wine and said things that sounded fair until you picked them up and felt how light they were. He died at midnight while the candle burned low. The tent flaps stirred though there was no wind. Loras turned and saw something move that had no right to be there. A darkness shaped like a man and like a wrong thought, and then Renly's life leaped out of him like a splashing fish and he fell with his throat cut and there was no one there holding any knife. Blood pooled and soaked the green rugs and the wine spilled and ran with it. And Loras made a sound no knight should ever make and no lover could help, and the whole southern host woke to torches and shouts and panic that spread like fire in dry grass. Word rolled north by morning. Stannis said nothing, which was as good as confessing in a place where men believed in shadows. Davos looked at the red woman with a face as gray as the sea under cloud. Ned sought out Barristan in the new dawn and they stood together with their hands behind their backs like old men at a courtyard where boys played at swords. And the old knight said, "The last king I served loved too much fire," and Ned nodded and saw that honor could be a lantern and also a tinderbox. The Tyrell banners dissolved, acres of silk torn down in an hour. They went home, their rage so vast it felt like absence, and spoke only of vengeance and of Marjorie's future and of the lion who would not die quietly. Some urged marching on the city in revenge, but without Renly, without ships, they were an ocean with no tide. They waited, they wrote letters, they courted possibilities as if they were princes. Stannis took Storm's End after that, because he always finished a task once he had set his teeth in it. But the taking did not relieve the taste in anyone's mouth. He came back to the city and found it different, as all places are when you have been reminded that men can make shadows kill. Ned received him formally and that night went to the gods' wood below the Red Keep. It was no weirwood, only a stand of oaks and myrtle around a pool that never grew still. He knelt by the water and set his palm to it. The cool slid into him and steadied nothing. Sansa came to him in the godswood with hair unbound and eyes rimmed red. She sat and did not speak for a time, and neither did he. The wind moved the leaves in little shivers. At last she said, Will they make the crowd watch? No one will force you, Ned said. That's not what I asked, she said, and the edge in her voice cut. He had never heard that note from her as a child. Will they make a show of her? Like they made a show of father's friend when he was killed. The one who looked like a good man even though he... Sir Hugh, Ned said quietly. They will not make a show. He had told Stannis this at the end of a long argument that left them both more tired than angry. It will be quick. Sansa nodded, and a tear escaped, and she tossed her head with an echo of some woman who had never lived in Winterfell. I dreamed of a queen, she whispered. I did not know what people were under the crowns. Nor did I, Ned said, and put his hand on his daughter's hand, and her fingers did not move away. Cersei went to her death as if walking to a feast. The square beneath the great September was ringed with men, but the sound that rose from them was not hunger. It was awe or fear, or that strange empty quiet men make when faced with something they cannot change and will not own. The High Septon muttered the right words. The blade hissed. Ned did not walk with the procession and did not stand at the front. He waited in his chamber with the window open and his eyes on the river until the bells tolled once and twice and stopped. He found he had been holding his breath and let it go. Sansa did not come to him that night, and Arya slept with her little sword hugged to her like a toy. Joffrey spat at every guard who brought him food and broke every cup he was given. Stannis went to see him once. There was a conversation no one wrote down because no one who heard it wished to remember it. After, Stannis came to Ned and said, He will go to the wall. He will be Ser Joffrey, not Lord, and he will face the only foe who does not care for our games. He will die, Ned said. Dying in cold and dark is no worse than dying in silk, Stannis said. A boy who learned lies as milk may learn duty if the milk is taken away. Children are not goats, Ned said, but he did not push. He had picked his fights with Stannis as carefully as a farmer picks stones from a field. There were too many to throw and only so much back for the back to bear. Tommen went to the Citadel in Old Town, to sleep among books big as bread loaves and to learn that the world was wider than a mother's hand. Myrcella went to a mother house where women prayed for what they had thrown away and what they had never had, and she wrote letters neat as lace on the edges of vellum and sent them north sometimes by mistake before the maids learned to watch where her pigeons went. The city forgot the children the way cities do. The city remembered the queen the way cities do too. The tail of her red dress grew brighter as it went, the fall of her hair more beautiful, the set of her mouth more proud or more cruel depending on who told it and how much wine they had drunk. Tywin marched. He moved like a storm front, slow and inevitable, and men ran before him because they had heard what happened to those who did not. He took the golden tooth and sat on it as if it were a throne and laughed softly when ravens told him that the stag held the city and the wolf the trident. Then we will fight with our backs to the rock, he told Kevin, and Jaime said, I have always liked the sea. And Tyrion said nothing but thought-long thoughts. The battle came on the Gold Road, where the land rolls like the back of a sleeping beast and you can find cover only if you're clever. Stannis was clever. So, in his plain way, was Ned. Between them and a hard-eyed Selmy, they drove a wedge into Tywin's mass and then feinted away like a fisher drawing a net through a shoal to make it break in panic. Tywin did not panic. He never did. But his men were not Tywin, and fear among 20 in 100 makes a crack any army will feel. Davos brought ships into the mouth of a little river, and men from the west woke to find a forest of unfamiliar banners at their backs. The river lords struck with howls like men who had watched their villages die in fire, and the north came on like winter and drove the breath from lungs and the hope from eyes. Tyrion Lannister led a handful of mountain men into a little pocket where the wolf banners ran thin and nearly cracked the wedge back the other way. He nearly died there under a man with a pike and a beard like a broom, then laughed aloud when the pike slid into the throat of an ironborn standing to his right and realized he was still alive, and that laughter might have saved him because it made his men insane and they carried him forward for 20 paces that mattered. But 20 paces were not enough against a plan that had ships and wolves and the kind of dull stubborn stone that held when even the Red Keep wanted to shift beneath anyone who stepped on it. When the day belonged to Stannis and Ned, they accepted it as if days had always belonged to them and always would. Bodies lay in the gullies and the grass swallowed their blood with the same endless patience it had swallowed every color of blood since men learned to stand upright. Tywin did not run. He withdrew in order and took his daughters in silence and set them behind his walls and waited. It happened that the river lords wanted to chase him into the rock as you might chase a rat into a hole and burn it alive there. But Stannis said, no, because he never did anything wild when there was something dull and sure to be done. He cut the west off. He sat on roads and sent letters to every minor lord with a keep stuck like a wart to a hill and said, which will be heavier on your table, pride or wheat? In 2 months the answer began to smell. Tyrion was captured by a Northman who had never seen a Lannister up close, and seemed disappointed that this one was shorter than the stories suggested. He was brought to the city and given a chamber with a bed that did not sag and a guard who did not talk. Ned went to see him because something in him had liked the man's eyes when they had spoken once in Winterfell, and because he thought perhaps they could save each other some ugliness. You will not die, Ned said, standing with his hands easy at his sides. Kingslayer's brother or not. I must learn to weep with gratitude on command, Tyrion said dryly. My father despises tears. That is not why, Ned said and told him plainly. About the children, about the law, about the country as one might speak of a field that could be sown if only men stopped trampling it. Tyrion listened. He respected plainness the way a good craftsman respects a good tool. In the end he shrugged, which on him looked like a man shouldering a mountain that he knew very well would not lift. If you keep me, he said, my father will set fire to the sea to get me back and discover the water doesn't burn. If you send me, he will think he has won something and will not notice how you have written your writ into his heart with this small mercy. If you kill me, I will be terribly unhappy about it. The half-smile took any sting from the last part. I would rather be terribly unhappy later. Ned looked at the little man a long time. If I send you, he said, you will tell him what really lives in this city now. I will tell him that men here are trying to be men, Tyrion said. He will not understand it. He will fear it. He raised the cup Ned had not noticed. To fear. Tyrion rode for the west 3 days later with a handful of guards who were as polite as spears and returned with their spears and without Tyrion. Tywin received his son like a man receives a letter from a debt he had forgotten and then remembered too well. He had raged so well it made his eyes too calm. We will win by law or steel, he said, and the words tasted like old coins in his mouth. The North settled or pretended to. Robb Stark did not take a crown in the way bards preferred. He wore no gold. He wore a sword at his hip and a dog's head on his banners and felt the weight of each letter he signed. He met with Stannis once in a tent that had no lessers in it. Ned sat with them, hands on his knees, silent unless asked. The conversation was an arm wrestle across a table no one touched. The Riverlands must be protected, Robb said. They will be, Stannis replied. They are the realm and I am the realm's king. The North must be left the North, Robb said. The North will keep its laws and pay its taxes, Stannis said, and send its men when winter is more than a word. In return, the realm will not pluck it like a goose every autumn. If that displeases any lord in a moon-embroidered cloak, he may look into my eyes and tell me so. Something like amusement flickered across Robb's face. A flash of a boy who had once laughed at snow sliding off a roof onto Theon's head. We will be friends, he said, and Stannis said, we will be men. And the two things were not the same and did not need to be. In the city, things found their new places, which is to say the old places with the dust shaken out. Stannis sent men to take down the worst of the brothels and fill the worst of the dungeons and hang the worst of the men who made coin from other men's hunger. He did nothing about the small hunger that filled the city every day because no one can. He attended the Great September and frowned at it, and attended the little, half-dead Godswood and frowned at that too. The Red Woman kept her counsel and lit quiet fires in a dozen corners. Ned stamped out some of those fires and left others alone because there were only so many boots and so many blazes, and because for every flame you put your foot on, 2 smokes rose elsewhere. Ser Barristan settled into duties that did not involve rescuing children from their mother or old men from their good intentions. He drilled the White Cloaks until they had no breath with which to gossip. He sat sometimes with Arya Stark on the steps of a courtyard and told her stories about knights who were not worth their songs and men who never sang because they were too busy doing what songs pretended was easy. She listened with her chin in her hands, and sometimes he would look up and see Sansa watching from a balcony with an expression he had learned from watching queens. Attentiveness and hunger in equal measure. Ned wrote to Jon at the wall, "Ravens are stubborn birds. They carry truth or lies with the same indifference and think only of meat." Ned wrote, "Winter is real. Look to your oaths. I am sorry for what I have not said and cannot say." He thought of a boy standing on a parapet in the cold, hair whipped by wind, watching a line where gray met gray. He thought of Benjen Stark's face receding into snow and did not say his name. He went down to the river sometimes and stood on the quay and breathed the rot and salt and thought of frost. Word came from beyond the wall that felt like a breath drawn sharp. Men spoke of dead things that walked. Old stories woke, stretched, and found the world exactly as they had left it, full of men too busy counting coin and crowns to look up. Ned took his letters to Stannis and said, "There must be fires on the wall that do not go out." "They will not," Stannis said. For this, his voice warmed. Duty had always softened him in a way love never could. "I will send men who understand cold better than kings understand courtesy." "Good," Ned said simply. "I will send grain." "You will also send watchers," Stannis said. "Men who tell me if the wall has learned to play at court." "The wall plays only at dying and at holding," Ned said, and Stannis did not argue, which was the best of victories. In summer you could pretend that wars ended. You could walk through the market and smell fish and blood oranges and think, this is life with soldiers in it rather than life under soldiers. The city learned to do that again. A mummer played a lion who became a mouse and was eaten by a cat who could not digest honor. People laughed. Bread cost too much. Wine cost as much as any man had in his pocket and a little more. Children ran in the gutters and did not know any other gutters. The bells of the September rang false sweet. Men knelt in cheap temples and whispered the names of new gods and old ones with equal desperation. When a raven came from the west bearing a thin thread of words, Tywin ill, the rock closed, a request couched as courtesy for terms no one admitted to needing. Stannis took the paper in his long fingers and looked out the window as if the rock itself might be seen from there, as if the west would show a flag if he stared at it long enough. He said nothing for a long time. "What would you do?" he asked at last, and turned to Ned as if remembering he had meant to make this a test. "Make him bend the knee," Ned said, "and make him feed his people before his tables. Take his pride and give him his lands when you have wrung the poison out. He will die soon. Other men who were boys will learn from that better than from any noose." Stannis' mouth tightened. "You always choose the slow justice. It is the only kind that whole." "Yes," Ned said. "The quick kind makes noise, and sometimes good wine is spilled with the bad. But it does not take root." "Very well," Stannis said. "We will try it your way." He said try as if it were something to be done with a sword and a man nailed to a door. But he did it. And the West took a breath it had been holding for a year and began to cough up its smoke. They found Peter Baelish at last, or he found them, it was hard to tell in the end. He had made a little kingdom along the fingers out of debts and smiles, and the not-quite fear that good men feel when they remember how close they once came to shame. He wrote letters hedged like well-tended gardens and proposed marriages with more hedges still. He came south in a small ship and found a city where no one much wanted to play the games he knew. He smiled, as a man might when asked to dice with someone who did not understand numbers, and tried anyway. Stannis listened to him for precisely 3 minutes and then set men to rummage his accounts like fishwives in a net. Ned asked after a girl with a peasant's name and a lord's eyes who had once played at being someone else near Baelish's brothel. No one knew. Baelish told a lie so gentle no one noticed it arrive, and by the time it had hatched into a lie large enough to ride, the court was busy with a new worry. Winter came down the mountains in ways you only notice if you have known real winter. A cold pressed in the stones. The sky lay lower. The gulls on the river wharf sounded more like old women than birds. Ned woke with his hands stiff and new, the way a hunter knows which way a heart has turned by the twist of a bent blade of grass, that the realm had taken a shape. It was a shape he would live with, and not always happily, but it was a shape made by men who tried to hold a line rather than men who tried to carve their names into it. He went to the garden that pretended to be a godswood and stood by the pool where the wind cut arabesques and thought of a true god's wood far to the north where the heart tree watched with eyes red as old wounds. Arya had grown out of her shoes and scuffed her knees learning things no lady would ever need and that might one day keep her alive. Sansa wore her hair with less fuss and read the faces in a room like a learned woman reads a book, finishing chapters she hated because they must be understood. Robb sent ravens with words he never would have allowed to leave his mouth if he had had to say them in front of men. Words about hunger and sheep and thaw. Jon wrote back once and then did not because the wall had swallowed him as it swallows all men, and it is a good thing for the realm that it does. Footsteps came across the gravel. Stannis joined him without asking leave to stand beside him, which in Stannis' mind was a compliment and in any other man would have been rudeness. They looked at the water like farmers judging weather in the depth of a well. "There will be more of it," Stannis said. "Always more." "Yes," Ned said. "We will be old men here," Stannis said. "If we live so long." "Yes," Ned said again. He thought of a face with melting eyes and red hair and shadow, of a girl's hand in his own, of a boy riding east across a yard as dawn crawled up stone, of a man he had called brother and loved through more mistakes than could ever be weighted fairly on any set of scales. Stannis turned his head. "Do you regret it?" Ned faced him. "Everything worth doing is something a man regrets in the half-dark when the world is quiet," he said. "But morning comes and you put your feet on the floor and you go on with it, and the regret becomes part of the thing, not the whip that drives you away from it." Stannis grunted approval at the notion of regret as a tool, which is what it would always be for him. "Good," he said softly. "Good." They stood together with winter at their backs and the city below them breathing its shallow, tireless breath. Bells tolled for some small reason. Birth, death, a wedding of tradesmen's children, and their sound turned thin in the cold. Ned thought of snow in the high passes, of men in black walking on ice so thin it sang, of white shadows moving in a wood where torches die and words freeze in the mouth. When he left the garden, he walked the same corridors he had walked the first day he came to this nest of knives. They were less sharp now, but no less a nest. He turned down a passage where Arya had once hidden and surprised a little boy beating on a pan with a spoon until a woman dragged him away by his ear. He nodded at a maester whose chain clicked like winter rain. He passed two men arguing about the price of salt and a woman telling another that she had dreamed of a white bear. He breathed tar and river and iron and the scent of chrysanthemums planted by some hopeful gardener who thought flowers could shame stone. He climbed the steps to his chamber, and there on his table lay a raven's letter bound in a ribbon with a broken white wax sigil, and he knew before he touched it that it would be news from the north and that none of it would be easy. He sat, and he broke the wax, and he read what men who had looked at the sky saw coming over the world like a tide. He folded it and put it on the table beside a map that had none of the right colors for winter. Then he stood and went to the window and looked out upon a river that did not know what season it was and a city that believed it had time. He did not believe in easy things any longer. He believed in mornings that came however the night went. He believed in men who held lines. He believed there would be need of both, soon and for a long while. He rested his hands on the sill where his knuckles had been white the night the choice settled on him like cold iron, and he felt not iron but the stone warmed by a pale sun. Then he turned back to work.